رحم الله من يقرأ سورة الفاتحة. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ربي اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. الحمد لله رب العالمين، ثم الصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين، واللعنة على أعدائهم أجمعين من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. أما بعد، فقد قال الله تعالى في محكم كتابه الحكيم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ومن يعمل من الصالحات من ذكر أو أنثى وهو مؤمن فأولئك يدخلون الجنة ولا يظلمون نقيرا. آمنا بالله، صدق الله العلي العظيم. Your second salawat for love of Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And your loudest salawat for ta'ajil faraj sahib al-asr wa zaman. Salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. أعظم الله أجورنا وأجوركم بذكرنا المسائب أبا عبد الله. May Allah increase in our reward for commemorating the difficulties of Abu Abdullah. We've been talking about the topic and the subject of justice and understanding its role from Allah given to us and in society. And the discussion for tonight is the concept of justice in raising our children. Now, the idea of how to discuss justice in raising our children comes in a variety of different formats of this topic, but the one that I think is important to stress on is the relationships between genders. One of the common questions that comes up, especially in those of us who are raising our daughters, is to say that why am I not treated the same as boys? And that Islam is unfair, or Islam is, na'uzubillah, unjust, that girls are treated less than boys. Now, to answer and understand this question, again, it's in the context of justice that we look at this question and we look at this discussion. And as such, it's an appropriate place to have this conversation that first and foremost, Islam does not believe in equality. We don't believe in equality. And it's a blanket statement, and we should ensure that it is entrusted to all children that Islam doesn't believe in equality. Islam believes in equity. There is a fundamental difference between these two statements: equality and equity. From far away, it may seem that the two are identical terms. Take out one L and you get equity. Put it in, you get equality. But there is a difference between these two. Equality says that everyone should be treated identically the same. Equity says that each person should be given what they need for success. So if one needs something different to be successful than another, this is equity. If I give everyone identical things, this is equality. Islam never believed in equality. Islam believed in equity. That the goal of Islam is that success should be attained, and that what is necessary for success to be achieved is given, not that the same thing is given to everybody. Understanding this, we know that Islam believes in equity when we look at verses similar to the one that we began our discussion with, which is in Surah An-Nisa, verse number 124, in which Allah says, وَمَنْ يَعْمَلْ مِنَ الصَّالِحَاتِ مِنْ ذَكَرٍ أَوْ أُنْثَى وَهُوَ مُؤْمِنٌ فَأُولَٰئِكَ يَدْخُلُونَ الْجَنَّةَ وَلَا يُظْلَمُونَ نَقِيرًا. Allah is telling us that whoever does good, whether they be man or woman, they will be counted as a mu'min, as a believer, and that they will be entered into the gardens of paradise, and they will not be dealt with unjustly. Here Allah is explaining and telling us that the characteristic, when Allah speaks of a mu'min, it's not just for the men, but men and women alike have the ability to be called mu'min in the Quran. And the address to mu'min is for both men and women. So wherever we see an address to Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, or we see ulaika humul mu'minun, wherever the mention of mu'min comes in the Quran, it is addressing both men and women. So don't think for a second that Allah differentiates between them on the basis of what they can achieve. Rather, what we take a look at is that there is equity and there is fairness in Islam, because Allah gives the explanation of saying that both shall attain heaven. Both shall be given reward for their actions. Allah in the Quran also says, Inni la udhi'u amala min amilin min dhakarin aw untha. That I do not lose a good deed of any person who performs it, whether they be male or female. In the fundamentals, the treatment and the aqaid of every person who exists, whether they be man or woman, is the same. Tawheed is the same, whether you're a man or woman. Adalat is the same, man or woman. Jahannam, Jannat is the same whether you're man or woman. In these affairs, Allah has said that the ability to achieve success is identical whether you're man or woman. But the process by which success is achieved is different for men and different for women. And there is no problem with this. Allah in many places gives us the instruction. For example, in Surah Hujurat, where He explains, يا أيها الناس إنا خلقناكم من ذكر وأنثى وجعلناكم شعوبا وقبائل لتعارفوا إن أكرمكم عند الله أتقاكم. Allah explains and He says, O mankind, O humanity, I created you in men and women and families and clans so that you may know each other. But truly the ones who are special in the eyes of Allah are not men, are not women, are not particular clans, but rather those are special in the eyes of Allah who have piety. And the differentiating and superior characteristic is not on the basis of gender, but rather is on the basis of one's piety in the eyes of Allah. Understanding this, we see that our goal, whether men or women, is the same. Our proximity to Allah is identical in the process of how it is achieved. It makes no difference. But the process by which we achieve this is something unique for each gender, that there is a difference between these two categories. To understand this, we can look at the life of our Holy Prophet Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That even from the fundamental of having daughters or sons, there is a difference. There is. There is a mistake in society that having sons is superior. It's a mistake. And I don't say this because I have 3 daughters. Let me just explain to you why. Had there been something better than a daughter to have, Allah would have blessed His Holy Prophet Rahmatul lil Alameen, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, with it. Allah has explained the superiority between these two genders, that if there is a superiority, society has it backwards. That Allah, when He wants to give, there is no one that He would give better than His Habib, His beloved. He refers to our Prophet as Habibullah, the beloved of Allah. And yet to Allah, what He gives to His Prophet is a daughter. It's one of the explanations of showing that there is a difference between these two, and that society is mistaken to say that one is better than the other in one aspect or another. But no, that rather that if there was something to be given, the best was given to Rasul. The explanation between sons and daughters is even given in the aspect of understanding that daughters are considered rahmah from Allah and sons are considered ni'mah from Allah. A rahmah is a mercy from Allah. A ni'mah is a bounty from Allah. And it's explained to say that on the day of judgment, Allah will not ask you about the mercies that He did upon you, but Allah will ask you about the bounties that He gave to you. There is a difference. There is a difference in how these two have been given to us. And there is a difference in what their reward and what their responsibility is. But one of the important points to understand is that just because there is a difference between them on this level, it doesn't mean there should be a difference in their treatment. Rather, we see one of the narrations in which a man brought his 2 children into the company of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He sat one child next to him. He sat one child away from him. He kissed and caressed one child. He ignored the other child. Rasulullah said to him, why don't you treat the two of them with equity? Why do you not treat the two of them with the same love? And he says, because this one is a son and that one is a daughter. And Rasulullah explains, he says, it would be right for you to treat them with the same love and to give them the same care, and it is wrong to treat them differently on this basis. This is one of the explanations of understanding that one of the aspects of the culture that was forgotten and that was lost, and that was a bad culture that Rasulullah came to reform, was the reform of this culture of abuse and mistreatment of women. It was the second Khalifa who complained, and he said that we saw in the example of Islam things that we didn't like. It was the second Khalifa who reverted back to ignorance. That he says, I saw when we came to Medina that the women would demand the same and have the same point of view and perspective that was only entitled to men in the city of Mecca. That Islam did not restrict them on the basis of having an opinion or having characteristics or having the ability to enter into society, but rather it was the previous culture that prevented them from having an opinion. When we look at the example of the daughter of Rasulullah, we see one of the statements where our Prophet explains, he says, the last person I see when I leave the city is Fatima. The first person I see when I return is Fatima. This statement of the Prophet is sometimes not understood. We say that this was an expression of love. Yes, it's an expression of love, but it's more than that. Our Prophet didn't always go on peaceful missions. At times, our Prophet would go to war. But he did not hide that from his daughter. At times, our Prophet would come back injured. He did not hide that from his daughter. He put his daughter as part of his messengership in the effect that she would be aware and educated, that when she entered into society, that she would be a capable person who understood the difficulties and responsibilities of being a part of the community. She would have an opinion about how to raise the community. She would be someone who knows about the difficulties that are impacted in life. One of the mistakes that we make is that we say, yes, they should be treated differently, but what do? We don't educate our daughters well enough that they should know how to handle the difficulties of life, that when they leave their father's house, that they should be someone who understands how to deal with difficulties of life and to be a member of a community, and they have to learn that after marriage. No, this is a mistake in the mistreatment. This is a mistreatment of daughters. Our Prophet didn't hide from his daughter. He did not hide reality from his daughter. Rather, he trained her with his own hands about what exists in this world and the difficulties that exist and how to help shape society into a better structure by including her in the conversation. So from one aspect, we see that the value of having daughters is very important, and that there is a difference in treatment between them, but not on the basis of education in the aspect of teaching them how to be members of the community and society. So where is the difference that we treat them by, and how do we understand this difference? With your loudest of salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. This is where we have to understand that there are differences in genders. And Islam explains there are only two genders. And gender is a physical definition. It is not a mental or desired definition that I can choose and decide what my gender is. No, gender is a biological definition. Understanding this, it's important to understand that gender does have roles and responsibilities in Islam, and there are differences within the genders, and that there are two physical genders. When commentary comes, and it's become a commentary in contemporary times, and it's worth mentioning, that I can choose the gender that I want. This idea of choosing genders, first and foremost, there's no reality to this. You can't change your gender. Today, what they do when they call this changing of gender is plastic surgery. It's not a real changing of gender. As long as the organs inside of a person have not changed, the gender of that person has not changed. They can do as much plastic surgery as they want. It is plastic surgery. The reality is the reality. The haqiqat doesn't change. Secondly, to understand, when, for example, someone describes and says, I want to be recognized through a different gender, It's something that is a warning for us. That this is an indication of something that is a sickness that is present within this person, that they are subject to their desires. What their desires want, they follow their desires. In Islam, Islam's purpose, the purpose of religion, is to educate us on how to control our desires. And that our goal is that Allah has created us with many desires, but that some of them are permissible and anything outside of what is permissible is haram. One who submits to their desires without consideration of what Allah wants from them possesses within them a sickness of the spirit. The same way that, for example, we can have a sickness of the body, and someone who possesses a sickness of the body, when we see them sick with the flu, what do? We protect ourselves from them. We separate ourselves from them so that we don't catch the sickness. The same is true of the concept of when we see someone with a spiritual sickness. That if we see the spiritual sicknesses, that they choose to say that my desire wants me to believe that I am not what Allah made me, I am something else. That should be a warning sign that there is a sickness present here. Separate ourselves from that environment to limit the interaction. Now, that doesn't mean that, for example, we don't talk to those people anymore. No. Or that we hate those people. No. Remember, one of the fundamentals of Islam is hate the sin, not the sinner. Let me explain what that means. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. There are many detestable characteristics that can exist in a person, and there are many sins that a person can commit. But we don't judge the person on the basis of their sin. For example, we don't have someone standing at the door of our Unity Center that says, tell me all the bad things that you do before I let you in. If you hit one of these, I can't let you in. No, we say anyone and everyone is welcome to come as long as they don't insist on sinning here. I don't judge you for the mistake you may make in your house. I don't judge you for the mistake that you make outside. As long as you don't insist on the sin here, you are welcome here. Because all of us are in the need for changing ourselves. And we come here to improve ourselves. This is our spiritual hospital. What kind of a hospital would we be if we didn't let the sick people come into the hospital? The only restriction that we make and we insist upon is that you don't come here and say, accept my sickness and insist that my sickness is a cure. You don't have to disclose it. We don't need to know. And anyone who wants to come, comes. Which is the definition that the sin is not welcome, but the sinner may be welcome here. There are many descriptions in this in which the status of the Ahlul Bayt. They did not prevent their companions. Their companions, many of them made mistakes outside. But when they would come into the presence of the Imam, they would be welcome in the presence of the Imam for chance that they would improve themselves and better themselves. In the same sense, when it comes to these issues, we see these signs if someone is insistent upon the attributes of changing themselves from what Allah created them to be, that this is a sign of a sickness. We avoid the sickness. We limit the interaction with the sickness. But should someone want to come for rehabilitation, should someone ask for assistance, we didn't say, no, Baba, no, I can't help you, don't come here. No, they're welcome. As long as the intention is to come and improve and to seek guidance, there is no restriction from this. But to understand, there are differences in gender. There is a difference in how we raise our sons and our daughters. There is an obligation to give them the tools that they need to be able to be raised correctly. One of the important parts of understanding the differences in the genders is that they don't need the same treatment. Allah created men and women to be compatible, not identical. One of the greatest examples of the idea that they should be compatible, that they work together, is given to us in the example of the marriage of Amir al-Mu'mineen and Fatima az-Zahra salam. In the example of this relationship, that this marriage was given to us as an example of both the etiquettes of marriage, the etiquettes of relationships between spouses, and the roles that both of these spouses embody in a relationship. From amongst the narrations that are given to us, that are narrated by Sheikh Abbas Qummi and others, they explain and say that after their marriage, these two approached our Holy Prophet and said, Ya Rasulullah, how shall we separate the responsibilities of the household? And our Prophet replied to them, he says, O Ali, you shall take care of the responsibilities outside of the house, and Fatima, you shall take care of the responsibilities inside of the house. The reply to this statement is noted as Sayyidah Zahra saying, Alhamdulillah. The explanation of this response from Sayyidah Zahra gives us one of the fundamentals of understanding the difference between these two genders. The statement of Sayyidah Zahra did not imply that she was incapable of handling the affairs outside of the house. Some make the mistake and say, oh, it was too difficult for her, that's why she was thankful that she didn't know. This is nonsense. Rather, the reply of Sayyidah Zahra is a lesson for us to learn that the priority that Rasulullah used to decide who shall have what responsibility is the concept of hijab. That Sayyidah Zahra saying, Alhamdulillah, is saying that Allah gave me, Rasulullah gave me a responsibility that I can fulfill without having to compromise my responsibility of my hijab, or make difficult for me my obligation of hijab to handle my hijab and the responsibilities outside of the household. So Allah and Rasulullah gave me an obligation within the house. This is an important, significant point of understanding that one of the fundamental priorities is the teaching of hijab and the idea of modesty. In a lengthy conversation, hijab is not just the physical covering. There is the physical covering, that is the hijab, and then there is the hijab al-ma'nawi. That hijab, that is the concept of modesty that needs to be present amongst both men and women. And that this is that hijab that impacts how our behavior and our relationships and mannerisms in society work. Many times there is a misunderstanding of the importance and significance of this hijab, that people don't understand that this is a significant priority in the religion of Islam. And when they start looking at gender roles, they become ignorant of this fact. Shall I give you an example? Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. I mentioned to you a few nights ago the concept of ethnocentricity. Ethnocentricity impacts how we look at men and women. And what's happened in America is that women have been told, and this is something that we need to correct, that if they don't receive the same treatment as men, then they are less than men, and that they're not being treated fairly. Islam doesn't believe in this. But the concept of this ethnocentric idea of equality has entered into the discussion within the bounds of Islam, which is why some people who have not understood the concepts of Islam correctly, they ask the question, why then don't we see a female marja? Why isn't that today, as progressive as we are and as much education there is, that we don't have a female marja sitting out and presenting the fatwa of Islam? This is someone who has not understood the fundamentals of what Islam wants from us as human beings. That ijtihad in its contemporary meaning is something that is mustahab. Hijab is something that is wajib. To fulfill the obligation of ijtihad, for a woman to fulfill that, she would have to compromise her position of hijab. Let me explain. For a marja, they have to be available to the community to answer questions of every person who comes at whatever point they come. They need to be able to answer these questions in person. They need to be accessible to people, and all types of people come to the hakim ishar, the religious authority, to come and answer these questions. For a woman to make herself available to anyone who needs to come is a compromise of her hijab and modesty. Allah has wanted that modesty to be preserved, not to be exposed, which is why when you take a look in history and you see our fourth Imam refer to Sayyidah Zainab as anti alima غير معلمة أنت عقيلة بني هاشم. You are the knowledgeable one who has not been taught. You are the intellectual lady of the Banu Hashim. All of these points pointed to the reality that as long as Imam Hassan, Imam Hussain were alive, Sayyidah Zainab did possess this knowledge. But with the presence of them, there was no need for her to expose her status in front of society. The significance of the priority of hijab was such that the neighbor of the house of Sayyidah Zainab says, I never heard her voice, let alone her footsteps in her house. And I was her neighbor. The significance of modesty far exceeds this point. And those who want, for example, the idea that marjaiyat should be accompanied in the aspect of women, they have not understood the importance of this hijab and the importance of preserving this hijab. One of the points that we need to understand is that the talab of marjaiyat for men, for us to go after ijtihad, is to try and achieve the status Allah has given to women through the process of motherhood and marriage. Meaning us as a society, the darajat Allah gave to women, we cannot attain without extreme effort to go and achieve that level. Shall I explain to you? You look at the concept of jihad. In the eyes of Allah, jihad is a great reward. For a man to go to jihad is one of the best actions that they can perform. And in some cases, it becomes wajib. But that reward that you attain by going to sacrifice your life and fighting in the way of Islam, Allah says the jihad of a woman is putting up with her husband. We have many mujahideen here tonight. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. The same way, through our aspects of scholarship and attaining these scholarship, we only begin to attain the reward that Allah has already given to women. Why did Allah not make any of the Anbiya women? Because every mother in her house is a Nabi. Every mother in her house is a Nabi. That mother is the source of knowledge and teaching in her house. And she raises that generation to be amongst the pious people and is the first one to teach her children about what it is that, who is Allah, what is His Prophet, what is Islam, and what is this Quran. Every mother attains that status. And amongst the men, we are few and far between. This is a misunderstanding that has been led and taught to women that they are lesser. No, Allah has raised their status quickly. Allah has given them great position within the religion of Islam. And that us men have to struggle to try and attain that position that women have been given. If a mother, while nursing or carrying her child, should die, she's considered shaheed. A man to attain a similar status must go and fight in the way of Allah. Look at how the greatness, the azamat of the status is, and they've been misled to believe that they are lesser. No, Allah has raised their status quickly. It's us who have a misunderstanding. To understand, we even take a look and we see how our Prophet has been mislabeled by this. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Our Prophet is referred to as Nabi al-Ummi. Nabi al-Ummi. There are three meanings to this. One, na'uzubillah, is what they use as the common explanation of saying the illiterate prophet, na'uzubillah. They say that one who is Ummi is illiterate. The second meaning of this, Nabi al-Ummi, is that Nabi that was sent to the people who are known as Ummi. The people of Makkah were known as the people of al-Qura. al-Qura is another name for the city of Makkah. Makkah on this earth is known as al-Qura, or the mother of where land was spread from, because the spread of land on the earth began from the point of Makkah. So the people were known as Ummi. هُوَ الَّذِي بَعَثَ فِي الْأُمِّيِّينَ رَسُولًا مِّنْهُمْ. Allah says in Surah Al-Jum'ah that He is the one who sent the people of Ummi a prophet from amongst themselves. That when we call Rasulullah Nabi al-Ummi, the reference is that he was the Nabi that was sent to al-Qura, or the people who are known as Ummi. And Allah Himself makes a reference to this. The third meaning of this Nabi al-Ummi is someone who has only received an education at the hands of his mother, and no teacher was ever involved in his education. When we talk about our prophet and how he presented the knowledge of the previous books and of the heavens and the earth, one of the accusations made against him was to say that, oh, he gained this knowledge from teachers who knew of Judaism and Christianity already. In reply to this, it was given that no, هذا نبي الأمي, no teacher ever taught him other than what his mother taught him and then what Allah himself has given to this prophet. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. This aspect of Nabi being known as Nabi al-Ummi was to show and say that no man had been his teacher after his mother's education. It was Allah is the one who educated him. Allah is the one who gave him this knowledge. This is why we even say about our prophet, مَا يَنْتِقُ عَنِ الْحَوَىٰ إِنْ هُوَ إِلَّا وَحْيٌ يُوحَىٰ, that he is one who does not speak from his own choice, but rather anything that this prophet says is a revelation that is given to him to give to you. Don't imagine any person has influenced any word that the prophet says. Do not imagine that anyone has the right to influence him, but rather that he is the one who Allah has given guidance to. So this idea of even our prophet being referred to as Nabi al-Ummi is to show his superiority, not na'uzubillah his lowering of status. But a mother is that teacher that has the status of the Anbiya in her own house. Which is why Allah promotes this status. And it is us men who have to work hard, become scholars and teachers, become guides of humanity to attain the same reward that every mother earns in her house. We don't look at the idea that, for example, there is a need for equality. Rather, Allah has raised the status of women to a great status. And it is us men who have to catch up with that status. It is wrong to let women believe that they are lesser and that they need to be given the same treatment as men. No, through the preservation of their modesty, through the fulfilling of their ahkam and the rights that Allah has given them, they are far ahead of us in status. We are the ones who need to catch up. We are the ones who are at a lower position in this concept. But one of the important points to understand is that hijab is not just a women's issue. The teaching and promotion of modesty comes from fathers and brothers and sons. The support of modesty and hijab is from the men. If men are absent from the conversation of protecting and preserving hijab, then don't be surprised that women don't fulfill their hijab. You can't walk away from this and say, you do this. No. Part of that aspect is look and see how when we give the example that Rasulullah split the responsibilities of the house, the man fulfilling the responsibilities outside of the house is in part the protection of the hijab of the woman. To give her that freedom in her house, to give her that opportunity to have that space in her house is from the obligation of men. The teaching of hijab comes from the idea of how the men support the household, which is why when we talk about Qasim ibn Hassan in this night, it is not without the mention of hijab. On the nights of Ashura, when Abu Abdullah gathered his companions, and he gave them the freedom to leave if they chose to leave, and they said, Ya Abu Abdullah, we would not leave you. Abu Abdullah listed the names of all of the shuhada for the next day. But there was one name that he did not mention, and it was this 13-year-old boy, Qasim, whose name he did not mention. To such an extent was Qasim disturbed by this that he went to his uncle afterwards. He says, oh, uncle, am I not included tomorrow? Am I not amongst those who will present their sacrifice for you? Abu Abdullah asks this boy, because a boy of this age, what concept and understanding does he have of what he is asking for? Abu Abdullah asks this boy, he says, oh Qasim, what is death near you? What do you know of death? Now the example here, and one of the hikmah of the question was, if the boy gave an example of something that is inappropriate for his age, it would be known that he is only following the example of the elders. He has no concept of what he is asking for. But the reply of Qasim showed that his intention was sincere from himself, that he says, oh uncle, death is sweeter to me than honey. And this answer explained that the boy had ma'rifah in his own ability to create an analogy. He created an analogy appropriate for his age. So Abu Abdullah replies to him and he says, "O Qasim, tomorrow not only is your name amongst the shuhada, but your cousin Asghar will be amongst the shuhada." At this, they describe the haya, the integrity of Qasim, that his immediate reaction is to say, "Oh uncle, does this mean that the enemy will enter into the tents of the Banu Hashim?" This is that concept of modesty and the men understanding the significance in supporting modesty. The reaction of Qasim was not to his own shahadat, but to the idea that the modesty of the women would be attacked, and his inability to bear that the modesty of their family, the modesty of their women should be attacked. This is why men are not separate from the conversation of modesty. Men are essential for preserving, protecting, teaching, loving, appreciating modesty. That if a 13-year-old boy of the house of Banu Hashim understands that we men, our integrity is tied, our ghira is tied to the hijab of our women, then us today, we need to make sure that it is part of our character, that the integrity and haya of our women is protected by our actions, and that we teach them the value of this hijab and modesty. Imam Hassan had at least 4 sons present in the field of Karbala. 4 sons. Hassan Muthanna, who fought in the battle of Karbala, was injured but lived, and lived after the event of Karbala. A second son who is known as Abu Bakr ibn Hassan ibn Ali, who was present in the field of Karbala, fought and was killed. Hazrat Qasim, who was the son who was 13 years old, and Abdullah ibn Hassan, who was younger than Qasim and was also killed in the field of Karbala. Of the 4 sons of Imam Hassan though, the one that we mention in the majalis is this Qasim. If one were to ask why Qasim, there are a few things about this Qasim that are unique in his shahad. From one aspect, they say that the love between the uncle and the nephew was very close, because Qasim at the time of his father's shahadat was only of the age of 3. One of my teachers narrates that at the time that Imam Hassan was about to be shaheed and his soul was about to leave his body because of the poison, it was the very early hours of the day. And Imam Hassan wanted that someone should bring Imam Hussain to his house. But there was no one there. So Farwa says, "I will go." Imam Hassan said, "No, bring this Qasim to me." He took Qasim and put some sand in his hair, tore his collar, and sent him to the house of his uncle. Farwa said, "But Qasim cannot speak. He's not even 3 years old." Imam Hassan says, "No, when they see the condition of this boy, they will know what time has come in my house." The descriptions say that when this 3-year-old went to the door of his uncle, the serving women of the house initially wanted to turn him away and say, "Oh, orphan, we give later in the day, come later, it is too early," until one recognized and said, "This is the son of Hassan who has come to our door in this condition. Tell Abu Abdullah, what is the condition of this Qasim?" That this child from that moment was attached to his uncle and was raised by his uncle, such that the day of Ashura in Karbala, this was one of the most difficult points to bid farewell to this child, because he had been raised in the lap of Abu Abdullah. The descriptions write on the day of Ashura, when the companions went, Qasim sat ready to go, as did many other young boys. But this Qasim would ask for permission. He would not get permission. He would kiss the hands of his uncle. He would follow his uncle around like a small child. "Oh, uncle, give me time now. Oh, uncle, it is my turn now." And Abu Abdullah would look at this boy that they described was a sliver of the moon in his beauty. And Abu Abdullah would say that, "You are the face of my brother Hassan. How can I send you in front of this army? Oh, my nephew, do you not see how they are heartless? And this child would continue to beg his uncle for permission until after the Shahadat of Akbar, that this boy in his frustration goes to his mother and says, "Mother, is there nothing I can do? My uncle won't give me permission." His mother mentions, "Your father had left a note for you that when your uncle is in difficulty, for you to give this note to your uncle. Oh Qasim, I do not imagine there is a moment more difficult that will befall your uncle than this moment. Give this letter to your uncle from your father and see if it helps you in any way." Qasim comes before Abu Abdullah, says, "Oh uncle, you won't give me permission, but read this letter from me." Written in this letter, the madmoon, the summary of it was to say, "This is the letter to Gharib Hussain from his brother Hassan. My brother, should you find yourself alone and in difficulty, should you find yourself with no supporters, spend this Qasim from me as a sacrifice in your way." Imam Hussein could not refuse the command of his brother. They describe and say that the nephew finally received permission from his uncle. There are two unique points in this. One is, what did Qasim wear when he went into the battlefield? Mu'arrikhin narrate and say that this Qasim wore the turban of his father, a long shirt and sandals when he wore into battle. They describe the outfit of Qasim in many of the narrations of the Maqatil, where they don't describe any other soldier's outfit, they describe the outfit of Qasim. The explanation of why they would mention the outfit of Qasim is to explain that it wasn't battle that Qasim went to do, but rather it was dhulm that was done against Qasim. The boy was so young and so small, there was no armor that would fit the boy, so that every soldier who went into battle wore armor. But this young man had no armor to wear because there was nothing to fit him. They describe another young boy who wanted to go and fight. After his father was killed in the first volley, the mother took the armor of the father and put it on the boy and sent him in front of Abu Abdullah. Imam Hussein looked at him and said, "Go back." The boy went back to his mother. He said, "Abu Abdullah will not give me permission." She said, "Maybe it's because the armor doesn't look like it fits you." She tightened the armor, sent the boy back. Imam Hussein again looked at him and said, "This is not what I want from you, go back." He again returned and went to his mother and said, "Imam Hussein won't give me permission." She again tightened the armor. She said, "Maybe it looks like you are not prepared for battle. I will prepare you better." The boy went back a third time. Abu Abdullah said, "Your father was killed. I do not want your mother to suffer the loss of a husband and the loss of a son in the same day. Go back to your mother." This boy goes back to his mother, tells her what Abu Abdullah has said. The lady comes to the door of the tent. She says, "Oh Hussein, you sacrifice your children but will not let me stand in front of Zahra. What shall I say to Zahra on that day? If I do not present my sacrifice, let me too present my sacrifice, Abu Abdullah." Now understand that even young children wore bat armor if it was their fathers into battle. But this Qasim had no armor, that he went into battle simply wearing a thobe, a shirt. The second unique point, they describe and say, when this nephew wanted to bid farewell to his uncle, that the two stood in the field of Karbala. The uncle hugged the nephew hugged the uncle. They held each other and wept until they became unconscious. Such was the difficulty for Imam Hussein to send this boy into battle, that Imam Hussein held this young man to his chest and wept until he lost consciousness. Oh, Abu Abdullah, you still have to collect him from the battlefield. When they regain consciousness, Abu Abdullah gives him permission. "Oh, my nephew, go and fight." They describe that this young man of 13 had no horse, so he did not walk into the battlefield. They write and say that we saw a 13-year-old boy who ran towards the army of Umar Sa'd. The army of Umar Sa'd saw this boy coming, and they said, how alone is this Hussain, who sends a sliver of the new moon in front of an army thirsty for his blood? This young man stood in front of the army. The army took him lightly. One of the soldiers of Umar Sa'd is reported to have sent 7 of his sons against Qasim, and Qasim killed each of his 7 sons until this seasoned warrior came forward and stood to fight the boy who killed his sons. One of my teachers describes, he says, if I was to tell you what was going on, the uncles stood in the back, Aba Abdullah, Abul Fadil, watching the fight of their nephew. The father was not there to watch the boy. But Abbas is the one who had trained this young man, that we would imagine as young men would come to fight Qasim, Abbas would look and see, this is a good match for my nephew. My nephew is one who I have trained. That Abbas would be patient until a seasoned warrior comes in front of a 13-year-old boy. We would imagine Abul Fadl call out, "Oh Mal'oon, have you no shame? You are a seasoned warrior. My nephew is 13 and thirsty for 3 days." But the bravery and shuja'at of Imam Hassan, that his son killed over 35 of the enemies of the army of Umar Sa'd, though he fought on his feet, until the Mu'arrikheen describe that the young boy standing in front of an army with his sandal that had broken, sat down in the sand of Karbala, put down his sword and started to repair his sandal. The enemy in front of him, he did not, the simplicity and beauty of this boy, he could not imagine that one would not give him the time to repair his shoe before attacking him. Mal'oon, Umar ibn Nawfal al-Azdi, raised the sword, attacked the boy, split his head. Qasim on the ground calls out, "Oh uncle, come to my aid." Abu Abdullah ran into the field. The Mu'arrikh describe Abu Abdullah reaches to Qasim as Umar ibn Nawfal al-Azdi sits with the sword on the neck of Qasim. The anger of Abu Abdullah, he calls out, "You dare slaughter my nephew when I am alive." Abu Abdullah cuts the arm of Umar ibn Nawfal. Umar screams to the army to come to his aid. The soldiers of Umar Sa'd ride into the field in the defense of Umar. They trample the body of their nephew. There are 2 trampled when they were alive. One is this Qasim. Abu Abdullah, when it clears, comes and sits next to his nephew. He says, how unfortunate the uncle, who when his nephew calls to him, the uncle cannot aid him. And if he reaches him, there is nothing he can do for him. The Mu'arrikheen describe the condition as such. Imam al-Hussain carries Qasim back to the tents. But the Mu'arrikheen note something unique. They say that as Abu Abdullah carried this 13-year-old boy back to the tents, the boy's feet would be dragged on the ground. They said, we don't understand why this would happen. Abu Abdullah was a grown man. Qasim was a boy. Abu Abdullah hugging Qasim to his chest. Why would the boy's feet be dragged to the ground? One statement says that the back of Abu Abdullah was bent by the weight of carrying his nephew. The other says that you must understand, when Qasim was trampled, his chest was spread apart.
such that he was now pulled into pieces. That Imam Abdullah would hug him to his chest, and the boy's back with him. ماتم يا حسين.
Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein.